She'd had one glass too many, so I did the decent thing. I walked her up her own porch steps and rang the bell. The night still smelled of rain, warm and dark on the old oak door. She leaned into my arm, half asleep, a folded scrap of paper edging out of her purse. The chime faded. For one breath it was just us in the yellow porch light, her weight warm against my side, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, steady. Then, the door swung open slow, and the woman standing there in the black blouse she wore to every client meeting was the last person on earth I expected to see. It was Diane. My boss. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense unless you know who I was before that porch. My name is Adam Fletcher. I'm 34, and I build other people's dreams with my hands. I'm a finish carpenter at a design-build studio in the Reno district of Denver, the part of the city where old brick warehouses turned into galleries and coffee bars, where the light comes in sideways through tall windows and lands on the sawdust like it's something holy. I do the last 10% of a house, the part people actually touch. A stair rail worn smooth under a palm. A window seat cut to the exact swell of a bay. The kind of work nobody photographs and everybody leans on. I live alone in a small apartment 10 minutes from the shop. No kids, divorced, though I don't say that word out loud much anymore. I keep 2 coffee cups in the cabinet and only ever wash one. It sounds lonelier than it is. The truth is, I'd made a kind of peace with the smaller version of myself. And peace, once you finally get it, is worth guarding. I got up early. I did good work. I came home tired in the right way, and I asked the world for almost nothing. For a long time, asking for almost nothing felt like the safest deal I'd ever made. I'm very good at not talking about the man I used to be. There was another city, another life, a version of Adam Fletcher who wore better shoes and answered to different people. I folded that up and put it away, the way you fold a letter you can't throw out but can't bear to read again. Nobody at the shop knew the whole of it, and I liked it that way. Down here, with the plane singing across a board and the linseed oil sharp in my nose, I was just the quiet guy who was good with his hands. That was enough. Most days I honestly believed it was all I wanted, and on the days I didn't believe it, I sanded something until I did. The woman who ran the place was Diane Ellison. She owned the studio, and she ran it the way a good captain runs a ship fair, exact, no favorites. She was somewhere in her 40s, precise the way careful people are, and she wore black to every meeting like armor. She could look at a joint I'd spent an hour on and tell me in 4 words how to make it better, and she'd be right, and I respected the hell out of her for it. She didn't hand out warmth cheaply. When she trusted you, you knew you'd earned it. And I had spent 2 years earning it one clean cut at a time. And then there was Ruby. I knew her the way you know somebody at the soft edges of your life. She turned up in the same circles, a friend of a friend, somebody who'd drift into the same backyard barbecue or the same crowded bar after a project wrapped. I knew her first name and almost nothing else. I knew she drew things, that she noticed the details other people walked past, that she carried a quiet that matched my own. I did not know where she lived. I did not know her last name. I certainly did not know she was anything to Diane. She was just Ruby, and being near her felt like standing in that sideways afternoon light, easy, warm, uncomplicated. She had a way of turning up wherever I happened to be, a gallery opening 2 blocks from the shop, a taco place I liked on Larimer. I'd notice her, and something in my chest would lift, and then I'd talk myself back down. I was 34 and divorced and hiding half my life. I had no business feeling lifted. So I'd nod, we'd trade a few sentences, and I'd tell myself it was coincidence. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about almost everything, that whole long spring, but I didn't know it yet. Standing on a porch that smelled of rain, my hand still under her elbow, watching a door open onto the one face that changed the shape of the story I thought I was living. That night on the porch, nobody said much. Diane's face did a thing I'd never seen it do, surprise. Then something guarded, snapping down over it like a shutter. She took Ruby's weight from my arm without a word, said a clipped thank you, and I drove home with my heart going too fast and no idea why. The Monday after, I learned the piece I'd been missing. Ruby wasn't just somebody at the edges of my life. Ruby was Diane's little sister. She'd moved to Denver a couple of years back and had been staying at Diane's place in Park Hill, the tidy old house with the oak door and the yellow porch light. All those coincidences suddenly weren't. The girl I kept running into had known exactly whose employee I was the whole time. Later I'd understand something else. Too, she was never really lost that night. She knew exactly whose porch she was standing on, but that understanding came slowly, the way the truth usually does when someone loves you and is afraid to say so. What I knew then was only that a door had opened, and after it, Ruby and I stopped pretending we were strangers. She started coming by the shop. The reasons were always thin, and we both let them be. She was dropping off something for Diane. She was in the neighborhood. She wanted to see how a certain cabinet was coming along, because she'd sketched something like it once. I'd be at the bench with a chisel and hear the side door, and there she'd be, leaning in the frame with 2 coffees, one for each of us, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I never asked how she knew I took mine black. I told myself she'd guessed. Everything about that spring, I was telling myself something. We talked. God, we talked. About wood, at first, because that was safe, how walnut smells sweet when it's freshly cut, how a board tells you which way it wants to bend if you're patient enough to listen. Then, about smaller, realer things. The town she grew up in. The way I could lose a whole afternoon sanding a single curve and not notice the light change. She listened the way almost no one does anymore, completely, like the thing you were saying was the only thing happening in the world. And she noticed things. She'd point at a dovetail I'd cut and say it looked like the work of someone who'd been taught properly once, and I'd feel that old life shift under me, and I'd steer us back to the safe water of the grain and the glue. Some evenings she stayed until I was sweeping up. The shop gone gold and quiet, the machines off, just the hiss of the broom over the concrete and the smell of walnut still hanging in the air. 2 coffees gone cold on the bench because we'd forgotten to drink them. I started listening for that side door. I started staying a little later, telling myself it was the work. It wasn't the work. It was the way the whole room seemed to settle when she was in it, like a board finally lying flat. One evening it rained hard enough to drum on the roof, and neither of us moved to leave. She sat on an upturned crate with her sketchbook and drew the shop, the clamps on the wall, the half-built cabinet, me at the bench with my back to her, and when she turned it around to show me, I saw myself the way she saw me, and it was gentler than the way I saw myself. I didn't have anything to say to that. I just looked at the drawing longer than I needed to, and she let me. And the rain kept on, and something in me that had been braced for 2 years eased a 1/4 inch. That was the whole danger of her. She didn't push. She just made a room where the truth could sit down if it ever decided to, and waited, and never once asked it to hurry. I'd spent so long guarding a door that I'd forgotten a person could simply leave it open and trust you to walk through when you were ready. There was a moment I keep it when she was laughing at something and reached to catch her purse before it slid off the stool, and a folded scrap of paper slipped half out of it. Old paper, soft at the creases like it had been opened 1,000 times. I saw it maybe 2 seconds before she tucked it back with a quickness that didn't match the rest of her. I didn't ask. You learn, when you're carrying something folded up yourself, not to reach for other people's. I didn't know what it was. I know now. But that spring I only knew that it mattered to her, and that she didn't want me to see it yet, and I let her have that the way she was letting me have my silences. Because I had my own folded-up thing, and it sat between us every time she looked at me a beat too long. I'd catch her studying me, not the idle way you look at a coworker's sister's whatever I was, but the way you look at someone whose story you already half know and are waiting to hear the rest of. And I'd feel the old life stir under the floorboards of the new one, and I'd change the subject. I told myself I was protecting her. Really, I was protecting the quiet. If she knew who I'd been, she'd have questions. And questions had a way of unfolding the whole letter until you were standing there holding all of it at once. Diane saw all of it. Of course she did. She missed nothing. She caught me one afternoon after Ruby had gone, wiped her hands on a rag, and leaned against the doorframe with that level look of hers. "She comes by a lot," Diane said. It wasn't a question. "She's easy to talk to," I said, which was true and also a dodge. Diane was quiet for a second. Then, "She's my little sister, Adam. She's had a couple of years that knocked her sideways, and she doesn't let many people close. Whatever this is," she tipped her chin toward the door Ruby had just gone out of. "Be careful with it. Be careful with her." "I will," I said. "I mean it." Her voice didn't rise. It never had to. "I know you. You're a good hand and a decent man, and you keep to yourself, and that's fine by me. But she reads people. She'll see whatever it is you don't say. So don't start something you're going to fold back up and hide." That landed harder than she could have known, because folding things back up and hiding them was the one thing I was truly expert at. I nodded, and she went back to her drawings, and I stood there in the sawdust, feeling like a man who'd been seen clean through. After that, I tried to keep the distance she'd asked for. I really did. I'd tell myself, when I heard the side door, that I'd keep it to 5 minutes. Keep it to coffee. Keep it light. And then Ruby would say something that stopped me, some small, exact observation about a thing I loved, and 5 minutes would become an hour, and the shop would go gold and quiet around us again, and I'd realize I'd been leaning toward her the whole time without deciding to. Twice that spring she started a sentence and didn't finish it. "Adam, there's something," and then a car would pass, or Diane would call from the front, or her own nerve would fail, and she'd smile and shake her head and say, "Never mind, it wasn't important." Both times, I felt the shape of something big standing just outside the door of what we said out loud. Both times I told myself I imagined it. Both times I let it stay outside, because I had my own thing standing out there too, and I wasn't ready to open the door either. We were two people, each holding a folded piece of paper, each afraid the other would ask to read it. What I didn't understand yet, what that whole slow, warm, careful spring was hiding from me, was that her folded paper and mine were, in a way I could never have guessed, the very same story. The contract came in early summer, and it was the kind that changes a small shop's whole year. A developer named Paul Renner was putting up a mixed-use building downtown, and he wanted a design-build studio with real craft behind it, not just the cheapest bid. Diane had chased it for months. When Renner's office finally called to set the meeting, she gathered the whole crew and said, in that even voice of hers, that this one mattered, that we'd walk in and let the work speak. I remember feeling proud to be part of it. I remember thinking, for once, that the quiet life I'd built was about to be rewarded for being exactly what it was. The meeting was in a glass conference room on the top floor of Renner's building, all cold, light, and a projector humming in the ceiling. Diane presented. Renner was an easy man to like, direct, curious, the kind who asked good questions. It was going well. It was going really well. Diane had just clicked to a slide of a stair rail I'd built when the door opened, and Renner's communications lead walked in, a few minutes late, apologizing smoothly, and the whole floor dropped out from under me, because I knew her. I'd been married to her. Vanessa Reed walked into that room in a tailored suit with a tablet under her arm, and for 1 second her professional smile froze, and then it came back sharper than before. 2 years and 1,000 miles, and there she was, close enough that I could smell the perfume she'd always worn, the one that used to mean home and later meant everything coming apart. She recognized me. Of course she did. And I watched her decide, in real time, what to do with it. I knew that pause. I'd seen it across a kitchen table 100 times, the little half-second where she weighed what a moment could be turned into. She always found the angle. She was finding it now. "Adam," she said, "warm as anything. like we were old friends at a reunion. Adam Fletcher. My God. Small world. Diane looked between us, Renner looked between us, and Vanessa, who had always understood a room better than anyone I've ever met, understood this one, instantly understood that I hadn't told these people who I used to be, and understood exactly how much that silence was worth. You two know each other, Renner said, half a question. Oh, we go way back, Vanessa said, and smiled at me, and it was the smile I'd learned to be afraid of. You should ask him about his old firm. Ask him why he really left Chicago. Go on, ask him. The room went still. I felt Diane's eyes come to me and stay. There is a particular kind of cold that comes when the thing you've folded up and hidden gets pulled out and opened by someone who wants to hurt you. I had built 2 years of trust in that shop, one clean cut at a time, and I watched Vanessa reach for it like it was hers to spend. She'd done it before, in another life, to bigger rooms than this one. She was good at it the way I was good with a plain years of practice, no wasted motion. She didn't lie, exactly. That was the cruel genius of it. She told a version that I'd been a rising design lead at a name firm, that I'd walked away from all of it, that people should wonder why a man like that ends up sanding cabinets in a warehouse. She let the word wonder do the work. She let the silence I'd kept turn into something that looked like a secret worth hiding. She weaponized the truth, because the truth, stripped of its reasons, can be made to say almost anything. I'm just saying, she went on lightly, to Renner. You'll want to know who's actually on your project. People who run from their own success usually have a reason. I didn't say anything. I couldn't find the shape of it fast enough. Every word I reached for felt like it would only prove her point that a man with something to hide would scramble to explain, and a scramble always looks like guilt. I felt my hand close hard around the edge of the conference table, and I made myself let go, and the water glass by my knuckles trembled in little rings. That was the only tell I gave. I'd gotten good, over 2 years, at holding still, and that was the trap of it, the thing Vanessa had counted on. If I stood up and defended myself, I'd look like a man with something to prove. If I sat there and said nothing, I'd look like a man with something to hide. She'd built a room with no clean way out and then handed me the door. I thought about the 2 years of mornings I'd spent walking into that shop, the joints I'd cut true, the trust I'd earned in silence because silence was the only language I had left after Chicago. All of it was in the room now, and all of it was being spent by someone who'd never earned a dime of it. I wanted to tell Diane that the leaving wasn't what it looked like. I wanted to tell Renner I'd have designed his building with everything I had, but every sentence I built in my head came out sounding like exactly what a guilty man would say, so I kept them, one after another, behind my teeth. I don't think I've ever felt so much like a plank being planed down to nothing while I stood there and let it happen. Renner frowned, uncertain now, the easy warmth gone careful, and Diane turned to me fully, and the guarded look from the porch was back, but deeper this time, because this wasn't a surprise on her doorstep. This was her studio, her contract, her name on the door, and a version of her best hand she suddenly didn't recognize. Adam, she said quietly, and I'd never heard her sound like that. Is any of this true? That's the thing about a well-aimed truth. It doesn't even have to be a lie to end you. Vanessa had walked into a room with nothing but a fact I'd chosen not to share, and she'd made it look like guilt. She hadn't brought a single new thing into that room. She'd just taken the quiet I'd worked 2 years to earn and held it up to the light at exactly the angle that made it look like something to fear. And the terrible part was that she wasn't entirely wrong about one thing I had run. I'd just never told anyone what from. I looked at Diane, and I looked at Renner, and past them, through the glass wall to the hallway, I saw someone standing very still. Ruby had come to bring her sister lunch. She was standing outside the conference room, one hand flat against the glass, a paper bag forgotten in the other, and she had heard all of it, every word Vanessa said, every silence I let stand. And her face, when I found it, wasn't shocked at all. That was the detail I couldn't make sense of. right in the middle of everything sliding out from under me. Everyone in that room had just learned who I used to be. Renner looked stunned. Everyone looked stunned except Ruby. That night she came to find me. I was on the back steps of the Park Hill house. I don't fully know how I ended up there, except that after the meeting I'd driven around for an hour, and my truck had brought me to the one porch that had started all of it. The yellow light was on. The night had that thin, high cold Denver gets even in summer once the sun goes down. Ruby came out the back door and sat next to me on the step, close but not touching, and for a long minute neither of us said anything at all. Then she took the folded scrap of paper out of her pocket and opened it in her lap. I'd seen it half a dozen times, without ever really seeing it. Now she smoothed it flat under the porch light, and I looked down, and my own hand looked back at me. It was a pencil sketch of a house, a small one, gabled, a little crooked the way a fast drawing gets. I knew the lines because I'd drawn them. I just couldn't remember when. "You gave me this," she said, 8 years ago. And then she told me. There'd been a free community talk in Chicago, back when I was the version of myself I'd folded away. She'd been 22, a design student, sitting in the third row. Afterward, she'd been too shy to ask a real question, and I, the me from before, had torn a corner off my notes and sketched a little house and handed it to her and said something like, "Build the one you can't stop thinking about." I didn't even remember doing it. To me, it had been nothing, a kind word on an ordinary night, the sort of thing you forget before you reach your car. She had carried it for 8 years. I tried to picture it a girl I'd never really registered, folding a torn corner of my notes into her wallet and carrying it through 8 years of moves and jobs and whatever the couple of hard years Diane had mentioned had been, carrying it to a new city, carrying it, without ever knowing it, straight to the shop where I'd be standing at a bench pretending to be no one in particular. It undid something in me to think of it. All that time I'd believed the old version of me was worth burying, and here was proof that on one ordinary night he'd done one small good thing that a stranger had decided to keep. "I knew who you were the day you turned up at my sister's shop," she said. Her voice was very steady, which somehow made it harder to hear. "I recognized you before you finished shaking her hand, and I could see you didn't want anybody to know. I could see you were healing from something. So I didn't say it. I wasn't going to be the person who dragged you back to a life you'd walked away from." She turned the paper over in her fingers, and it trembled a little, the soft old creases catching the light. "All those times I came by the shop," she said. "All those coincidences, they weren't. I knew exactly whose porch I was on that night, Adam. I've known the whole time. I didn't know how to tell you I'd been keeping a drawing of yours in my wallet since I was 22. There's no version of that sentence that doesn't sound like too much. For a long moment I couldn't speak. Every coincidence of that whole warm spring turned over in my head and landed as something else, not chance, but a quiet, patient, half-terrified kind of hope. She had known the biggest thing about me and stayed anyway. She hadn't wanted a single thing from the man I'd been. She just wanted me to have somewhere safe to be the man I was. All that time I'd thought I was the one keeping a secret, when really we'd been guarding the same one from opposite sides. So I gave her the piece she didn't have. I told her the truth Vanessa had bent in that glass room, that the firm, the leaving, all of it wasn't a scandal I'd run from. It was a marriage that came apart because Vanessa had wanted something other than me and had told the story her way to everyone who'd listen, and that I'd been so worn down by the noise of it that I'd stopped fighting for the version with my name on it. I'd left because staying meant living inside someone else's story about who I was. Denver, the shop, the quiet that had been me learning how to breathe again. I didn't hide it because I was ashamed of the work, I said. I hid it because I was ashamed of how easily I'd let her take it. Ruby listened the way she always did, like it was the only thing happening in the world. And when I finished, she didn't tell me it was okay, or that none of it mattered. She just folded the sketch, closed along its soft old creases, and pressed it into my hand. "It was always yours," she said. "I was just keeping it safe." I sat there with 8 years of a near stranger's faith folded into my palm, and I understood that I had a choice to make, the one I'd been avoiding since the night the door opened. I could fold everything back up again, the way I always had, and go back to washing one cup. Or I could stop. "Then let me be the one who stops running," I said. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I meant a hard thing all the way through. The truth, it turns out, travels both directions. A few days after the meeting, Renner called Diane himself, not his office him. Vanessa's performance in that glass room had bothered him more than he'd let on, so he'd gone looking on his own, and the man he turned up wasn't the one she'd described. Years back, in another city, he'd walked his own kids through a small public library, the Larkspur branch, a low brick building with a reading room that filled up with afternoon light. He had loved that building. He'd taken photos of that reading room. What he'd never known, until he started making calls, was the name of the architect who designed it. It was mine. He'd been sitting across a conference table from the man whose work he'd admired for years, and hadn't once connected him to the quiet carpenter Vanessa was so eager to run down. Vanessa's version fell apart the way bent things do once you set them down on a level surface. A person who'll twist one truth to win a room will twist others, and Renner had built a career on reading people. Her standing with his office didn't survive the week. She left the project, and she left it the way she did everything, loudly, and then she was gone, and the quiet she left behind was clean. I won't pretend I didn't feel something watching it happen, but it wasn't triumph. It was more like setting down a weight I'd carried so long I'd stopped noticing my own arms were tired. Renner kept the studio on. He kept it, he told Diane, precisely because of the work, and because a man who'd stepped back from a name to do the last 10% of a house by hand was exactly the kind of craftsman he wanted touching his building. He asked, almost shyly, if I might consult on the design side too. I said I'd think about it. Then I said yes. Stepping back toward that old work didn't feel like reopening a wound. It felt like picking up a tool I'd set down too early, and finding my hand still knew the weight of it. Diane and I had a conversation, eventually, about the 2 years I'd said nothing. She didn't make it easy, and she shouldn't have. But when I told her the whole of it, not the version Vanessa sold, the real one, she listened all the way to the end, and then she nodded once, the way she nodded at a joint that had finally come out true. "You should have told me," she said. "I know. But I understand why you didn't." She looked toward the front of the shop, where her sister's laugh carried in from the street. "She's been happier this year than I've seen her in a long time. And here I was, warning you off her." A dry, small smile. Turns out I had it backwards. Ruby and I went slow after that. We'd earned slow. There was no rush now, nothing left to hide, so we let it take the time it wanted to take. Saturday mornings at the taco place on Larimer. Evenings when she'd sketch at the end of the bench while I worked, the two of us not talking, the shop going gold and quiet around us the way it always had, except now the quiet meant something we both understood. I stopped keeping only one clean cup in the cabinet. Small thing. It felt like the whole world had shifted an inch and finally sat level. There were 100 small, ordinary things after that, and I found I wanted all of them. The way she hummed without knowing she was doing it when she was bent over a drawing. The way she'd steal the heel of the bread at the taco place, because she said it was the best part, and nobody ever fought her for it. Sunday mornings that started slow and stayed slow. I'd spent 2 years arranging my life so that nothing could be taken from me, and the strange thing about loving her was that it gave the world plenty to take, and I found I didn't mind. I'd been so careful for so long. Careful is a fine way to protect a life. It's a poor way to live one. Ruby never told me to stop being careful. She just kept showing up, patient as weather, until being careful started to feel like more work than being happy. Some evenings I'd catch Diane watching the two of us from the front of the shop with an expression she'd never admit to, somewhere between exasperation and something close to relief, and she'd go back to her drawings before I could name it. About a year after the night the door opened. The sign out front of the studio changed. It had said, Ellison Design Build for years. One spring morning I came in, and there was a new board leaning against the wall, the paint still drying, and it said, Ellison and Fletcher. Diane had made me a partner and hadn't told me she was doing it until the sign was already made. That was her no speech, no ceremony, just a fact she'd already decided and let the world catch up to. I stood there looking at my own name, and for a second the old fear rose up, the one that says, you'll be handed something good and then lose it, so better not to hold it too tightly. Ruby was next to me. She must have felt it, because she reached over and squeezed my hand. Just once, and the fear set back down where it belonged. We hung the sketch in the entryway. The little crooked house, framed at last, the soft old creases still showing through the glass. People who came in never knew what it was. To them, it was just a drawing of a house. To me, it was a map somebody had held onto for 8 years, waiting for me to be ready to follow it home. One ordinary afternoon, the 3 of us stood out in front of the new sign. Diane, Ruby, and me, the paint barely dry, the smell of it sharp in the spring air, a saw running somewhere behind us in the shop. In the glass of the door I could see all 3 of our faces reflected back, layered over the street and the light. Ruby looked from the framed sketch in the entryway to the sign with both our names on it, and she said, You finally built the someday house. She smiled. It just took you a while to find the address. I didn't have a good answer for that. I just took her hand, and we stood there in the sideways spring light, and for once I didn't feel like a man guarding a smaller version of himself. I felt like a man who'd been handed back the whole of his life and had finally learned how to hold on to it. I used to think that hiding the man I used to be was the way to keep the peace. Fold him up, put him away, keep only what was safe to show. I built a whole quiet life on that idea, and I guarded it like it was the best I was ever going to get. But the woman I thought had just wandered drunk onto the wrong porch that night already knew every folded-up thing about me. She'd known for 8 years, and she stayed not because of who I'd been, and not in spite of it, but because she'd seen, long before I had, that the man sanding cabinets in a warehouse and the man who once drew houses for strangers were the same person, and that neither one needed to disappear for the other to live. That's the thing nobody tells you about the truth. When it comes from the wrong person, aimed to wound, it can feel like being stripped bare in a cold glass room. But when it comes from the right person, someone who already knows the whole of you and stays, it doesn't expose you at all. It brings you home. I spent years running from the man I used to be. She was holding the map the whole time, folded small in a wallet, waiting for me to be ready to read it. So, let me leave you with 2 questions tonight. If someone quietly knew the whole of the past you're running from, would you want them to say it out loud, or to do what Ruby did, and simply stay? And what is your own folded piece of paper, the small thing you've carried for years because, once, it gave you hope? If this story found you somewhere tonight, do me a favor. Tap that like button, subscribe, so you don't miss the next one. And tell me your answer down in the comments. I read every single one. I'll see you there.